Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my video covering my top 10 novels that I read this year. As a reminder, these are not all novels that were published in 2021. They're just the novels that I read in 2021, and my ranking just has to do with my personal liking of them and how much of a favorite they were for me. You know, it's possible that I might think one of the books that's rated, number 10 is better written maybe than the book that's rated number 8 or something like that, but as it comes down to it, since this is, my BookTube channel, this is just a reflection of the books I read. They were my favorite, and I'm going to rank them in order from number 10 to number 1. Number 10, I have The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. This was just, kind of a surprise to me that Louise Erdrich had another book out this year, since she had just won the Pulitzer Prize for The Night Watchman this year. But this book was just delightful, really. In lots of ways. I liked it better than I liked The Night Watchman, actually. It involves an indigenous woman named Tuki and her kind of adventures with ghosts and her struggles with COVID and marriage and her past and reconciling what happened to her in her past with her present, and just it's set in a bookstore, which is essentially the bookstore that Louise Erdrich owns in Minneapolis. Louise Erdrich herself appears in the book as a character, and I just thought it was really well handled. And I think I've seen somebody else say this, but I believe this to be true also, that maybe it was Steve that said this. But in terms of a book which kind of covers the impact the pandemic has had on people's lives, or at least talks about in which the pandemic plays some kind of role in the lives of the characters, this is as good as you're going to find, I think. But that's not the only thing the book's about. The next book is the beginning of a series of books I really have, which were recommended to me by other booktubers. This is actually one of my favorite things about BookTube, is to pick up books that are meaningful to other booktubers who I like, whose opinions I respect, whose taste in books seems to be something that I find interesting or that I might agree with, and to read those books. And so in January I read The Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner. This was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and this was recommended to me by Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading. And this book is just beautiful. It is unapologetically a story about a man and a woman, a marriage, their relationship, how two very different people find themselves in a marriage that they love one another, but their differences create strain and stress on the marriage, how that has a heritage for, or how that their relationship affects the heritage of the people who come after them, or the lives of the people who come after them. It's kind of framed around their grandson telling their story. And if it weren't for the last few pages, in which I just think unnecessarily strange things happen, which I still haven't fit with the rest of the story, this book would be much higher on my list, because the writing here is just beautiful. And I thought this is a pretty gorgeous book about the American West and marriage and relationships, etc. I really like the book. Along the same lines, at number 8 on my list is This Is Not a Novel by David Markson. This is one of Mark Nash's favorite authors, favorite books, and I read it again in January, because oftentimes in January I read books that are recommended to me by other people. I read it in January, and I really liked it. If you don't know, This Is Not a Novel is essentially a collection of just kind of facts and factoids that are somehow maybe related to one another and somehow not, that Markson collected and then put together, arranged, I assume, to carry some kind, or convey some kind of thought or purpose or meaning, or maybe not. Maybe you as the reader just impose all those things. And I'll be honest with you, when I started reading, I thought, well, this is just me reading facts, which may or may not be true, but it really became kind of a really enjoyable read, a really thought-provoking read, and I don't think you can help but try to create those associations between the things he talks about, the repetitive nature of some of the things, how he kind of refers to the writer as, almost the only character in the book, even though it's just statements about what the writer thinks or does. And I really liked it. Again, this would go on the list of books that I'm not sure I completely understand, but I completely enjoyed reading, and certainly there's that. I also read, early in the year, I read the last of of W.G. Sebald's novels that I hadn't read, and that was Vertigo. Of all of Sebald's novels, or what we call his novels, The Immigrants, Rings of Saturn, Auschwitz, this is probably my least favorite, but my least favorite Sebald is still good enough to make my top 10 list in a year. This is, I think, Sebald's first novel. By the way, if you don't know, Sebald writes kind of this blend mixture of real and not real history, and anyway, it almost feels like travel writing. Anyway, so if you don't know that's kind of why I keep hesitating to call it a novel. This one, essentially, our narrator, who shows up in one way or another in all of Sebald's books, our narrator is essentially following a trip taken by his hero and one of his writers he admires, and that was Kafka, and kind of in the process going through a mental breakdown of his own, and there's all kinds of repetitive imagery and ideas and numbers, and it's just really great. It also, I learned, having read the biography of W.G. Sebald, Speak Silence by Carol Angier, also learned that there are some autobiographical elements perhaps in this, particularly when the character visits what is actually the original hometown of W.G. Sebald. So I really like that because it kind of fits really nicely into the Sebald catalog. At number, what am I on? 10, 9, 8, 7. At number 6, I have Quiet Flows the Una by Farouk Sahek. I think I'm saying his name right. This is a book that I saw on Jen at Remember Reed's channel, and it sounded really interesting, in part because it seemed like it was had elements of fishing, but also it is set during the Bosnian War, the Civil War, which takes place in Bosnia. Our main character, just like the author, was served during the Bosnian War as a paramilitary. He was involved in the fighting. He himself witnessed atrocities, apparently committed, perhaps, or was around when atrocities were committed. And essentially, I think what this book is, which again is one of those books that's hard for me to define, is in some ways a representation of the author or a person in this situation trying to come to grips with what is done, what has been done, their memory of what's been done, how they move on with their life in the future, how what they've done or how what happened is connected to the past. And it's just really, really powerful, and in lots of places really beautiful. I like the natural elements, the nature elements, where Sahek is remembering, or his main character is remembering, time spent at his grandparents' house, which is along the banks of the river Una, in their house, which is not necessarily in the best shape, but fishing in the river and swimming in the river and spending a long time around the river as a child, and then ending up fighting along that river as an adult, and then living in the same region after the war is over. It really has some beautiful passages, very moving. I'm kind of a sucker for books which kind of deal with war and its impact on those who were participants. I read a lot of World War I fiction. Works of Tim O'Brien related to Vietnam are very powerful and important, or I think very good books. And this really fits in there, and it was just a great reading experience. Not always perfect, but easily in my top 10. Number 5 is a book that I just finished, and that is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. It's a buddy read I did with David, who is the husband of Hannah from Hannah's Books. I still have to listen to David's last message. I just saw that he left it on Voxer to finish up that buddy read, but this is just delightful and just a great, great book. The story itself has power. If you don't know, there is a lot of emotional stuff taking place in Mrs. Dalloway. Basically 2 timelines, one following Clarissa Dalloway, who's throwing a party, and another, not as often explored, is a timeline or a part of the story involving a character named Septimus, who is a World War I soldier suffering from what today we call PTSD. At the time they called it shell shock. And there's kind of a twinning of their stories and a twinning of their experiences. It's written in what I just think is the best example of stream of consciousness I've ever read, in terms of just handling it deftly and lightly for the serious and sometimes depressing subject matter. There is a real energy, a real vibrancy in the writing and in the story. And as good as the story is, and I do think the story is quite good, it's also a book, I think, just to read for the pure pleasure of reading a writer who had to be, or this has to be one of the examples of her writing at the top of her creative powers, because it doesn't feel like to me that there is a word, phrase, an image that's out of place, and it is deep and rich in all those things. So that was my number 5. At number 4, At number 4, I have The Yield by Tara June Winch. I read this as a part of my own kind of Indigathon reading, because I always miss the real Indigathon. I'm going to get it right this coming up year in 2022. The Yield is written by Tara June Winch. She is an Indigenous First Nations person from Australia, and the story basically involves in a really... The story basically kind of tells the history, I think, of the treatment of indigenous people by white colonial settlers in Australia, but it does so in what I think is a really deft, clever, brilliant way. Oftentimes it is, there is an actual story at the heart of the book. It's not just about, it's not a novel whose political point is first and foremost. It's a novel whose story is also beautiful, and the kind of the politics, the message, if you will, is there as well. But it basically involves a young woman going back to the place where she grew up after the death of her grandfather to go to his funeral, and that place then being endangered by a mining company who's going to move in and take it over, which is just kind of, replicating what happened to Indigenous people, First Nations people in Australia on a smaller scale. But the really brilliant part of this is the part in which she discovers her grandfather's dictionary of their people's language and words. And the dictionary entries are interspersed in with the chapters. And as you go along, you realize that the dictionary part of the story, dictionary part of the novel, is telling a story as well. And it's telling a part of the story as well. And it's just, I think, just really beautifully and beautifully, wonderfully handled. At number 3, I have At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop. This is a book involving about a Senegalese soldier, a Senegalese military unit during World War I, who were kind of used as shock troops against the Germans. The idea played up that they were savages because they were black, and their main character, who I think's name is Alpha, if I remember, becomes traumatized by an event in which he has to watch his best friend die, and he becomes kind of the exact thing that he is supposed to stereotypically be, so much so that he's such a vicious and malicious killer that even the people he's associated with, even the members of his own group, think he's gone too far. And that's as much the story I want to tell you, because I think that it is a book that I hope almost everybody will read. If you can stand the subject matter, hope almost everybody will read, because it is incredibly dense in images and themes, and it's incredibly powerful. And I'm still asking myself questions about this now. Jack the Rambling Raconteur recently did a review of that. If I remember, I'll put a link to his review down below. And after that, he left me a message on Boxer and asked me about a specific event that took place in the book. And I gave him an answer, and he said, well, I thought maybe it was this, and I realized, wow, maybe I misunderstood the whole thing. It is, it is just a really rich reading experience, and a relatively short book at around, I think, 180 pages. No, around 150 pages. I think it won the International Booker Award this year, and well deserved. At number 2, I actually have 2 books because they're part of a series, and that's The Other Name by Jan Vos and I Is Another by Jan Vos. This contains books 1 through 5 in the septology. The next 2 books are coming, or the next 2 volumes in the septology are coming out, I believe, here in the United States in February or March, and I'm waiting to get the next one of those because I do want my covers to match. I believe the last volumes are already available in Europe. I've seen Celia, who I bought these books and read these books on her recommendation. I'll leave a link to her channel down below as well. Seen Celia review the book and essentially talk about how beautiful it is, and that's exactly what I would say. These books are just a beautiful reading experience, and again, it's true with a lot of the books that I like the most. It's a hard experience to explain. Essentially, what we're doing is we're following a character named Asle, who is an artist. But there's another character named Asle, who is an artist who lives nearby, and their lives intersect so much so that it feels almost as though one is it's kind of like the bizarro version or the doppelganger version of the other. And the books are about personal history, they're about grief, they're about loneliness, they're about friendship, they're about love, they're about marriage. And there's just something hypnotically beautiful about the writing. Ordinarily, you know, when I find like novels that repeat images and sentences and phrases and ideas and images over and over again, they become tiresome. Not for 1 second did either of these books become tiresome. They are truly beautiful in ways that I don't have the words to explain. And in any other year, I had an extraordinarily good reading year. In any other year, these books would easily be at the top. But at the top of my list of books, number one novel, I'm going to call it, for 2021 is Nupaming by Leanne Batazamasake Simpson, who is an Ojibwe writer, a First Nations writer, Anishinaabe writer from Canada, and this book is just, again, it's just to me magic. It essentially centers around the spirit of the Anishinaabe people receding from the physical world in the book, literally sinking to the bottom of the lake, and then kind of the Anishinaabe people who the story surrounds are both people, and then they sometimes are just spirits that are represented by animals, and how they interact and how they survive in the modern world in Canada. And it highlights kind of the loss of a lot of indigenous culture and knowledge. It highlights the strength of continuing, I think, indigenous Anishinaabe culture as a way of unifying and helping those indigenous people move forward. It involves generational differences and conflicts between Indigenous, First Nation, Anishinaabe people in Canada, and their attempts to pass on culture to young generation, and the younger generation either accepting it or not. It is frank about the problems that face a lot of First Nations people, or at least the Anishinaabe people in Canada, and how they've been treated, and some of the ridiculous things that have gone on. Anyway, it also is really a hymn of praise to the adaptability of Indigenous First Nations people in Canada, and the strength they have to survive and preserve those ways. And it's just beautiful. I finished it and I reread it immediately. I literally got to the last page, I turned the first page and started again. And it is a unique book in its format. It's unique in its sense that it makes no concessions to the white colonial gaze. Anishinaabe words are not translated, but you can find those easily on your own online, and that adds a tremendous amount of meaning to it. It is a book that is paginated and set up interestingly. Oftentimes there are pages with just a few words at the top, and I can't remember if it was Mark or somebody else pointed out, because Mark Nash has this book on his list too, pointed out that you're kind of supposed to read those spaces, to read the sentence and then give yourself time to let your eyes fall to the bottom of the page before going to the next one, because in that time you have time to reflect on what was happening and to formulate an idea about it before you go on to the next. It's just an extraordinary book, and I know not everybody who has read it has been as moved by it as I was, or likes it as much as I did. But it's just easily my best book of the year. Anyway, there you go. They're the top 10 novels. They're my top 10 novels for 2021. If you've read any of these books or not, I look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.